Want to welcome you guys back to another episode of Pistons Talk Podcast presented by FanDuel. In today's episode, what we'll be discussing is Trajan Langdon held a end of the season press conference with the available media today. And we're going to be going over and reacting to some of the questions that he was asked, kind of got into why the Pistons weren't as active at the trading deadline as some fans wanted the Pistons to be. Also, kind of talked about possible moves for this offseason, what the Pistons possibly need. Also, talked about Jalen Duren, Asar Thompson, Kate Cunningham, and others. So, we're going to be going over everything today. But let's get straight into it. One of the first questions that Trajan was asked by the media was, do they have any regrets of not being a little bit more aggressive at the trading deadline? And this is what Trajan had to say.
Trajan, getting back to the deadline, a lot of people thought you needed that second scorer to be with Cade. You opted to, in your words, stay on the margins. Do you think the organization might have been, for lack of better terms, seduced by regular season, how good you guys were? Because, as you know, regular season and playoff basketball are completely different things, as we saw this postseason.
I think in the room we evaluate pretty objectively where we're at and where we think we're at and why we think we've been successful. I don't think there was a rock that was not overturned in terms of understanding where we're at and how we can move forward. We looked at different things. Different things weren't available. Some things were way too expensive for at that point, we felt. And we had a pretty good roster. We felt the move that we made helped us. Obviously, that player wasn't available for us in the postseason because of an injury, and I think that might have hurt us a little bit as well. It's not the only reason, but we went on a really good run. We won 7 games, and I think we were right there to win 8. Right, we were a couple minutes away from winning a game that would have had us playing tonight. So, there's a lot of successes. You can't take away from that. You can nitpick at certain things, but I think there's 60 wins and losing in the second round. I think if any of us would have said that back in September, we would have been pretty satisfied with that.
So the way he worded it, there are 2 things that I took away after listening to that, right? The first thing was certain things weren't available. So to me, that would imply they called about a player and the team that they called just weren't interested in dealing him. I know whether you guys want to read into the Michael Porter Jr. stuff, this past NBA trading deadline, and a lot of Pistons fans really had him high on their list. And I can understand it. He was having a career year in Brooklyn. And just the 3-point shooting this year was absolutely absurd by him. Maybe the Detroit Pistons called Brooklyn to see if they were willing to trade Michael Porter Jr., and they really weren't. And if the conversations got to a point where he said things got a little bit too expensive. Now, there were also reports of Lauri Markkanen, who Danny Ainge really likes Asar Thompson, and he wanted the conversation to start with Asar for Lauri Markkanen. Obviously, the Pistons weren't interested in that. So we really don't know what was available in the Detroit Pistons, conversations with the front office. I know a lot of people looked at the guard from Chicago that got dealt, Kobe White, that went to Charlotte for a few seconds, and Ayo Dosunmu, who went to the Minnesota Timberwolves for a few seconds. And the only rational, level-headed way I could try to explain it, where I don't actually get pissed off by thinking oh, that's why they didn't go and get these guys. They had to give up multiple seconds for a couple month rental, and there's no guarantee that either of those players would have re-signed in Detroit. There's no if you threw Chicago 3 or 4 seconds for Kobe White and he's a free agent, are you re-signing him? Are you going to lose him in free agency? Now you have less second round picks and less draft capital to kind of work with. And I know some people will probably roll their eyes at the second round pick conversation. But second round picks can be valuable if you hit on them. Just in the Pistons case, they really have not hit on a second round pick in quite a long time. Just off the top of my head, the last second round pick that I think that they did a pretty good job of identifying was from a previous regime. Bruce Brown was a pretty solid second round pick, but outside of that, I mean, like we've had second round picks like Davidas Servidis, Bobby Klitman most recently, who flamed out. I think a lot of us were high on Bobby, never really did anything in the NBA. Pistons waived him. Hopefully Chaz Lanier doesn't kind of follow that trend of, being a second round player that doesn't pan out. But that's the only rational level-headed thinking I could come up with why you didn't target one of those Chicago guards, because I do think that Ao DeSumo could have helped in these playoffs a ton. Same with Kobe White. I mean, Kobe's White three-point shooting, I think, would have been huge for the Pistons in these playoffs. But we really don't know what was available. But the way Trajan said, some things were too expensive and some things just weren't available, kind of makes me think that they did call to make upgrades to the roster, but certain teams just weren't really willing to move on from those guys. Like I'm thinking of Trey Murphy like right now, because it's a player that I think a lot of us um, hear in rumors with the Pistons about the Pistons possibly trying to acquire him. And I know I'm rambling a little bit. I saw a trade proposal for 4 first-round picks. That's just too much for Trey Murphy. But I want to kind of stay focused and get back to the next question that was asked from the Detroit Pistons media members. And this was about Trajan possibly getting a secondary scorer and taking a deep dive on what the team needs to add this offseason. And this is what he had to say.
Amongst the things you learned about your team this season, do you feel going forward now from 14 to 44 to 60 wins that there has to be some adjustments? Maybe everybody talks about getting that second score. That's more than just words. Is that something that you seriously have to look at now to take the next step?
We'll do a deep dive into what we feel made us successful, and why we feel we came up a little bit short. A lot of people are looking at one game. I think if we would have won one game, you can't say, "Oh, we're going to play into just one game of success." Either that's not always the answer either, right? So one game winning or one game losing, I don't think can define how you're going to move forward. So we'll take a holistic view of the roster. We're still super young. All of our guys are going to iterate better. They're going to all be better players next year than we were this year, just like we saw from last year to this season. So we'll take a deep dive. We'll figure out what we need to add, and like I said, we'll step out. We'll look at 35,000 feet, and we won't look at us as a one seed. We'll look at us as how do we get better.
So I know that answer that he gave was probably very unsatisfying, but most of these press conferences are very boring and very just in between the lines. You're not going to get too much out of a head coach or even just a president like Trajan is. But something he said that I think really resonated with me is taking that 35,000-foot view, meaning that they will look at all options. They're not going to be so close-minded where I see a lot of Pistons fans saying like, "Oh, we're just running it back." I never really got the impression from watching this press conference today that they're solely open to just running it back. I mean, if there's a player that does become available this summer or via free agency to make them better and kind of aligns with their philosophy of how they want to build a team, kind of aligns with how you want to just compete over the next couple of seasons, then they'll make that move. I don't really know if there's a player out there. I've seen a lot of people put these like mock trades together. Like I saw one for Kawhi Leonard today. Like I like Kawhi, but I don't really know how many years the guy like has left of playing at the level that he's at. I'm not really entirely sure if the Pistons really want to go for like that old type of veteran, like a Kevin Durant type of trade. I do think they do need a secondary score, but Trajan is kind of banking on these players getting better. But if there is an opportunity that does present themselves to get better, he said, like, we'll look at a 35,000-foot view and, look at everything. He's not opposed to not making trades. He's not opposed to not making this team better. It's just some teams just get really crazy with the trade uh, offers that they send to other teams. Like we touched on earlier, like Laurie Markkinen for a star. Like most of you guys probably hear that. You're like, absolutely not. I'm not trading the best defender on the team for a guy that plays one side of the floor. And like you never really know how these negotiations do go with opposing general managers and opposing presidents of basketball operations on a basketball team. But it was really interesting for him to kind of lean into like keep developing the core that you have and also having an open mind of what they possibly could do this summer. Now, he also kind of touched on two players that are, I thought they were very polarizing last season, Jaden Ivey and Malik Beasley. Now, he was asked about them kind of in a situation of if it was a handicap or not, and this is what he had to say about those two.
Handcuffed last year in the offseason by the Beasley situation and maybe even J.I. situation.
I wouldn't say I was handcuffed. I think we wanted him back, and we didn't really have a choice, right? We knew he was going to come. Well, we thought he was going to come back healthy. We planned on him coming back and probably not being the player that he was pre-injury right away. But again, it was a broken ankle. People come back from that fine. It takes time. But we were excited about getting him back, and obviously the Bees situation was difficult. Getting word on it days before free agency and having to pivot, and I thought we pivoted well. But yeah, losing a type of player like that was so instrumental to our success the year before would have been helpful. But things happen, and those are things you can't control. You just have to make the best of it.
Sure. Now, the Ivy question, I was kind of surprised that the way they asked it about it being like handcuffed. I never really felt last season going into it that Jaden Ivey was kind of like a handcuff type of situation because I agree with Trajan. Like he was coming off of breaking his fibula, breaking his leg. And I think a lot of us were pretty optimistic of like what he could possibly do. Now, obviously, I don't think anyone could have foresaw him having knee surgery right before the season started. And he had arthroscopic knee surgery, and then he was just never really the same type of player. He was dealing with just that right knee that he had that surgery on, and then they eventually do trade him to Chicago, which, at the end of the day, don't really know if he's going to be in the NBA, but, wish him well. I didn't really feel like Jaden Ivey was a handicap. The Beasley situation, he wouldn't really speak on, and he did say he's actually still under investigation, which I didn't know that the investigation was still ongoing. I know he's playing over in Puerto Rico right now. I don't really know how the rules kind of vary if you're being under investigation by the NBA. If you could still play overseas, that's news to me. But get your bread while you can, bees. It's interesting though that the way he kind of talked about like Beasley being such an important piece of that team, and he was last season. Made over 300 threes, set a record. And our floor spacing last year was huge with Malik Beasley out there. And it was a big loss. And they did have the pivot. Trajan's right. I mean, you had the pivot by getting Duncan Robinson and trading Simona Fontecchio in a sign and trade to try to get Duncan Robinson this season and replacing him with Malik Beasley. And Duncan Robinson had a hell of a season. Like, don't get it twisted, but he was no Malik Beasley. Like Malik Beasley, I felt was a little bit more ready to fire a three-point shot, where Duncan to me was a little bit more cautious when he was shooting threes. But Duncan did grow on me this year with his ability to put it on the floor and some of the looks that he has with Jalen Duren and the chemistry that he did build with the young core that we had. But it was pretty interesting of Trajan's comments to say that they were really disappointed with how things did kind of transpire like 24 hours before free agency, and they just had to basically go to a plan B. Like obviously the plan A was to bring Beasley back and maybe sign like a veteran minimum guy like Javonte Green, which we don't really know like what this roster would have looked like with Beasley coming back on a full mid-level exception, and if it would have differed in any way, shape, or form. But I did want to kind of touch on the Jaden Ivey and the Malik Beasley situation because he was asked. One of the next questions he was asked is what this team needs going forward. And this is what Trajan had to say about that.
Aside from development of the core, which is obviously critical, what are a couple of the things that you think that the group, your team, needs the most?
No, it's a good question. I think, more ball handling you can have on the floor, the better. I think you see these teams that are successful have a lot of people that can, whether it's initiate bringing the ball up or actually execute in the half court in terms of getting paint touches and making decisions. I think the more guys like that you have, the more difficult it is to guard. So we'll look at some of those things, and I think just spreading the floor and shooting, I think helps. I think everybody knew that was something that we were going to, that we might struggle with a little bit. And so I think addressing some of those things could help. But again, those things are hard to find, and they're expensive sometimes, and sometimes other teams don't want to part ways with it.
So Trajan kind of talked about what the team needs going forward. And I 100% agree with him. I think you need more perimeter shooting to surround Cade Cunningham with. We saw so many times this season, the Pistons just shot a miserable percentage from three, but they were able to win games because they got to the free throw line and they lived in the paint. And like you got away with it, but like in the playoffs, when like you're not shooting the ball the best, like Duncan Robinson was your only real high volume 3-point shooter. Obviously, Marcus Sasser did get some clock. Danish Jenkins stepped up huge, but I think you do need more perimeter shooting. And the secondary ball handler is something that I was screaming for last summer. I was really confused why they didn't get a backup point guard and just decided to roll with Karis LeVert and Jaden Ivey, because I don't think either of them are really an everyday secondary ball handler. Apologize if you can hear the rain. We're getting a big storm right now up here in Michigan. But a secondary ball handler in someone that can shoot, he kind of said it could get expensive. And I know some people speculated that he was talking about Kyrie Irving. I really don't know what Dallas is going to do with Kyrie Irving. You guys coming off an injury that he had. Didn't really get to see him this year at all. I don't know what Dallas wants to do, but I would assume they like Kyrie Irving. They want to hold on to him with Cooper Flagg and the core that they're building over there. But, I mean, you can get 3-point shooting and a secondary ball handler with two different players, or you could try to address that need, and you guys can kind of think of the secondary ball handlers and 3-point shooters that exist in the NBA. Like off the top of my head, I think of like a Zach LaVine, right? And obviously, his contract is a little bit on the pricey side, but doesn't have that many years left on it. He is a secondary ball handler. He can shoot the 3-point shot really well. Just defensively, it's a tough watch, and I think that would be I think a tough sell in terms of just like trying to commit to that and trying to hide his deficiencies defensively. But I think if you have any player on your roster that could do it, it's Asar. But that's like one of the players on the top of my head of a secondary ball handler. Someone can shoot the 3-point shot. I mentioned Kyrie Irving. I'm sure there's others out there. I saw some people kind of mention Jamal Murray. I don't know what Denver's going to do with their core. Obviously, Nikola Jokic is still there. Jamal Murray is still there. Aaron Gordon. Like they have a really good team, but like just off the top of my head, like secondary ball handlers and 3-point shooting. The way Trey just said, it can get expensive. Like to me, the only way it comes expensive is if you're looking at those type of archetype of players that can play either point guard or shooting guard position and share ball handling duties with Cade in the backcourt and kind of take stress off of him of, being able to create their own shot, but also creating shots for others where he doesn't have to initiate every single action in a half court setting or bringing up the ball in transition where he doesn't have those high turnover games. But I thought it was really interesting the way Trajan said it could get expensive. So I don't want to speculate. I'll let you guys speculate. You never really know. But I want to kind of get into the rest of this podcast and what he did have to say about individual players. We're going to stick with Jalen Duren. I think Jalen Duren is probably one of the most I should say he's probably going to be one of the most talked about Piston players outside of Cade Cunningham this summer just because of the contract. And this is what Trajan said when asked about Jalen Duren.
You take a look at how to continue building this roster. Of course, one of the biggest topics that you have to address is Jalen Duren for this upcoming offseason. What can you share about how you're going to go about, evaluating not just the regular season but the playoff that he had, and what does the offseason look like from you in that standpoint?
Well, first of all, JD had a fantastic season, All-Star, one of the biggest contributors to us being the number one seed. Darn near 20 points and 10 rebounds per game. An incredible year, an incredible leap from last year to this year because of the work that he put in last summer and his focus. And I have no doubt that we'll help him put a plan together and he'll attack it this summer just like he did last summer. He'll come back a better player from his experience, not only during the regular season, but also in the postseason, just like all of our guys will. So we look forward to coming together with his representation, getting a deal done, and for him to continue to be a Piston.
I think one thing what people are going to be focusing on is the last 10 seconds of that clip. And I should know better by now when my mute is muted. I apologize for that. But Trajan kind of talked about being excited to work with his representation, and they expect him to be a Piston. Now, there was a lot of reports that did surface out yesterday. We got two separate reports. We got one from Omari about a price figure with what Duren's camp wants. And then we got another report from Hunter Patterson talking about what the Pistons kind of view Duren as. Now, all the reports this year where Duren wants to get $40 million, Duren wants to get a max. Omari's report saying that his camp could want up to $40 million a year. There are reports that the Pistons don't want to pay Jalen Duren a max, but they do want to re-sign him. I don't really know if there's a middle ground between like the 40 million to like meeting in the middle, right? Because I don't really think if you're the Detroit Pistons paying Jalen Duren $40 million, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to build a championship contender. And to me, at the end of the day, the goal for this roster is to compete for a championship at the end of the day. You have your franchise guy in Cade, who's on a supermax, basically, a fun supermax. It's not like the crazy supermaxes that are like $300 million, but he's at like 269 right now over a 5-year period. He's going into, I believe, his second. I think next year will be his third year of that. But Jalen Duren at $40 million to me, I think it's a little much. Like, I don't really think you can afford to pay him $200 million. I think there's a middle ground, though. I told you guys, like, my highest I would consider paying him is like around 28 to 29. I mean, if it gets into the 30 range, again, it's more than I would like, but I also understand that he's 22 years old right now, and he doesn't really have a face-up game yet. But I know that there is definitely a face-up game in there. I just don't know how much he's going to develop over a summer, and if it's ready to be displayed consistently throughout a regular season. We did see him take a couple of mid-range jump shots this year, and the form doesn't look bad. The form looks good, but I'm just wondering how much does the Detroit Pistons organization and JB Bickerstaff really want Jalen Duren taking a good 12 to 15-foot jump shot on a consistent basis. And I know it's still a work in progress. I see him working on it. During warm-ups, I've seen him working on it in the offseason with his trainers. But the $200 million for Jalen Duren, to me, I think is definitely a conversation that we'll probably be having all summer long. I'm just not really sure if you're the Pistons, you can really afford to pay him $200 million over a 5-year period. I think that's quite a bit. But it does sound like the Detroit Pistons are anticipating Jalen Duren being on the roster. And I think that's what a lot of fans have questions about, of like, what is the price figure? That's the price figure right now in the, basically the end of May. We'll have to wait and see what does happen as we do get closer to the deadline for players to sign their free agency deals. But that report from Amari yesterday saying that his camp wants $40 million. I'm still just trying to process that, because I don't really think the playoffs really earned him a $40 million contract. Had a hell of a regular season. I'll give him that. Like almost 20 points a game on 10 rebounds a game as well. Like that's great. But the playoffs, he had a huge drop off. And I honestly think it did cost him quite a bit of money, because if he was still giving you 20 and 10 in the playoffs, then I think our opinions would be a little bit different, and we could maybe talk ourselves into $40 million a year. But I don't really think he's a $40 million a year player right now. Just the way that he played in the 2 rounds of these Eastern Conference playoffs. Trajan also talked about Asar Thompson and Jalen Duren, kind of signaling how they could be expensive in the long term. And this is what he had to say.
Once the steam wears off of the season, when you look at the 30,000 foot of the franchise and draft capital you have, financial assets you have, the youth of the roster, all that, as a GM, does that excite you going to an off season and have all those tools at your disposal?
Yeah, I think yes. We still have some optionality. I think if you see obviously JD and AT will be expensive. And once that happens, the optionality decreases. But right now, there's we have some things that we can look at, and we'll look at everything. And we'll try to determine what things we can execute on that make us better, and what things we can't, or what things are the best path to go down, not only for next year, but also building forward. Those are the things we have to look at too. This isn't a 1-year thing. Thing that I've always said is sustainability in terms of our being competitive. And so we have to keep that in mind as well, and not just say, okay, we're going to just do this next year just because of what happened. No, it also impacts our future planning. And so we're going to be very mindful of that.
So he was kind of asked about just like the excitement of having optionality and having a little bit of flexibility with this roster. And obviously he understands that flexibility is not going to last forever, because you eventually do have to pay these guys, but also understands like you could make a move where maybe you have good success for maybe 1 to 2 years. But I think what the Pistons ultimately want to do is they want to maximize Cade Cunningham's window to where he has more than just 1 to 2 years of possibly having a deep playoff run, making the NBA Finals, and winning a championship. I think what the organization wants to do is keep this team together if they can, because financially it could become difficult. But I think Trajan kind of saying like, we want to have, more than just, a 1 good season. He doesn't want to skip steps. He's been very big on, we don't want to skip steps. Skip steps would just be throwing 3-4 draft picks, maybe a young prospect or 2, and just trying to have like maybe 1 good year so you could leapfrog a team in the East. I think he understands that he wants to get better, but he also wants to do it in a way where this team can still be competitive more than just a short window. And obviously JD and Asar are going to be expensive, just because when you look at this roster, like they all have to get paid. Like Duran's up for a contract. Sar's extension eligible. Stu's extension eligible. After that, Ron will need a contract. And you can't keep everyone. Someone is going to be a casualty because you do have to make this roster better and you have to maximize windows. But very interesting that he did say both Duran and Asar will be expensive. But I want to go into one of the next questions that was asked, and it was about Tobias Harris. So let's get into that because Tobias Harris is a pending free agent.
Question one, from your point of view, how beneficial has Tobias Harris been for this organization over the last 2 seasons? And two, what can you share about how you guys will go about bringing him back, decide whether or not to bring him back?
Yeah, Tobias has been great. I thought he was hot. He played some of his best basketball with us in these postseason games. But his approach, his professionalism has been huge in terms of us establishing the environment that we have in the past 2 years. There's not a day he doesn't come to work. There's not a day that he doesn't do extra work, pre-practice, post-practice, everything. He's obviously in the community, one of the finalists for the community award for the league. We're very proud of what he does for us, for this organization, for this city, and he's very proud of it as well. And it's hard to put in words what he has done for this organization and for our young players. They call him Unc for a reason. He comes in, he leads in a variety of ways that nobody will ever see or ever feel, but our guys do, and we do as an organization every day. So, we appreciate everything he's brought, and we hope that we can bring him back. He's somebody that we want to keep in a Pistons uniform.
So they want to keep Tobias in a Pistons uniform, but at the end of the day, I think it really depends on what his market is. I know yesterday, Hunter Patterson outlined in his article that Tobias is likely to have several suitors as free agency. I don't really know what teams will be targeting him. The only team that I saw this season that has eternal interest in Tobias is Los Angeles, and Los Angeles is one of the teams that does have cap space, along with the Chicago Bulls and the Brooklyn Nets. So maybe Tobias does decide to go play for the Lakers. I'm not really entirely sure if he does. But I think just his impact over the past 2 years has been really big for the Pistons, not only in the win column, but kind of showing these guys how to take care of their bodies and be professionals off the court. The organization has spoke very highly of him. Even Trajan said it. He's always going the extra mile, before practice, after practice, helping the young guys out. Obviously, the final 3 games in the playoffs didn't really seem like he was right. Kind of seemed like he was gassed. Just everything just seemed like he was just overexerting himself just to even get an advantage on isolation. But it'll be interesting to see what his market is. I don't think it's going to be the 2 years, $52 million deal that we gave him. I think there is a price point for Tobias, but I don't really think that the Pistons are looking to pay him over $20 million a year to come back. I know I've told you guys before, my dream is to kind of give him an Al Horford role of him coming off the bench and just kind of being a vet and a mentor, and the Pistons kind of upgrade that power forward position in the long term. Now, who is that going to be? I'm not really entirely sure who's out there via trade or what does come available in the NBA draft or even in free agency. I'm not sure, but it'll be interesting to see what does happen with Tobias Harris. But I did want to kind of touch on that because we really don't know if he's going to come back, if he's going to go sign with another team and get one last bag before he does eventually retire, because he's been in the NBA for 15? Next year will be his 16th season. So he's 33. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with Tobias Harris. Trajan also kind of touched on Asar Thompson. And I kind of wanted to react and go over that with you guys as well.
You mentioned AT and the success he had this season. What's kind of the big picture plan for him to continue progressing?
He was big time. I think he took a huge step last year. I think as the season went on, you saw how much he impacted the game on both ends of the floor. He put a lot of time into his offensive game last summer. I think he'll do the same this summer, and I think he'll come back with more confidence. But remember, kind of last year, it wasn't a full season for him, and so getting a full season under his belt, and now being able to work a full summer. He worked summer, but it wasn't like he's going to this year. We won't have as many restrictions on him this summer as he had last summer. And so he's going to be able to go out and do some serious work. And I know he's excited about that, but you're not going to have to worry about Asar Thompson putting in work and competing. That's one thing about him is he competes at a high level. He's team first. He's going to put in the work, and he's going to listen to the best way that he needs to put in the work. So we're excited about our future with him.
So Trajan mentioned that Asar did have some restrictions working out last season, which I wasn't really fully uh, aware that last offseason he actually had restrictions. This will be the first year where he doesn't have restrictions. And he mentioned him being in the gym with Fred Vincent, being in the gym working with various trainers, which I think the one thing with Asar is we all know how great of a defender he is. He's an elite perimeter defender and one of the best defenders in basketball. I think this playoff showed us how dynamic of a defender he is. I mean, you got Kenny Atkinson basically game planning uh, around him so the Cavs didn't have to have the ball. He's like, anytime we saw Asar, we passed the ball on the opposite side of the court so we didn't have to deal with him. That to me is just an ultimate sign of respect from an opposing coach because they know what a problem you are on the defensive end of the floor. It's never been defense with the SAR. It's always been offense. It's always been like if he can develop some sort of jump shot, it's over for the league because defensively, you know what you're getting. If he can develop a mid-range jump shot, if he can develop a three-point jump shot, I think this team's ceiling goes in a completely different direction. And you're talking about a guy that could easily be an all-star. So it'll be interesting to see like how much he does develop this summer without any restrictions, um, because he had the blood clots, obviously. But I'm very excited to see like what his offseason work does look like, how much better he does get from working with shooting coaches and different uh, skill development coaches this summer. And like Trajan said, like you don't have to worry about Asar not putting in the work in the gym and trying to better himself because he's probably one of the hardest working players on this team. Like this is a guy that watches film 20 minutes after the game is over in the locker room of where he can get better. So no doubt in my mind, Asar Thompson will take his offseason very seriously and get better. Did kind of want to touch on Asar. One of the next players that we're going to be touching on and listening to Trajan is about Cade Cunningham and him coming back from a collapsed lung and kind of the process of maybe possibly not being 100% healthy going into the playoffs.
He said he wasn't quite 100% during the playoffs. Where do you think he's at now? Do you think he wore down at all a little bit just because he wasn't able to have much of a ramp up in terms of conditioning for the playoffs?
No, I'm glad you asked that question. And that Cade was an absolute warrior. You know, I certainly haven't gone through a collapsed lung. I can't imagine many people in this room have, and especially a collapsed lung and fractured ribs at the same time, and really getting no ramp up going into the most intense part of the season. He played 3 games. And when you have a collapsed lung, you can't do anything for 7 to 10 days. You're sitting on a couch and you're making sure that you're just relaxing. And so that deconditioning just happens, and it's deconditioning at the exact wrong time of the year when you're heading into playoffs, and especially with what we ask from him. So for him to get back to the place where he was playing at a high level and leading our team, both on and off the floor and playing both ends, a lot was asked from him in a short amount of time. So for him to do what he did, he was an absolute warrior, and for that we're all appreciative. But what he did is not easy.
So obviously coming back from a collapsed lung, we weren't really sure if we're going to see Cade Cunningham to end the season. He comes back, I believe, the final 3 games of the regular season, tries to condition himself that way. And I think a lot of you guys pointed out that he had something wrapped around his rib cage because he did have a collapsed lung and also kind of like fracture like around his ribs. I'm not giving excuses for Cade whatsoever. I thought he had a phenomenal playoffs. I was really impressed with just his overall impact offensively. I think the only thing you could probably really nitpick was the turnovers, and I'm just kind of I'm going to chalk that up to just being fatigue, right? I think there were just some mental errors on his end of just making just certain turnovers where it just kind of has you like scratching your head and you're just like, huh, like why did he make that pass? I do think he will get better. And I think one area for him this offseason that I'm intrigued to see is like, can he shoot 40% from three for a long period of time in the regular season? I know during the playoffs he was shooting over 40% from three. That three ball looked really good. It just didn't look good in game 7 because he went 0 for 7 against Cleveland. But again, I was really impressed that one, he even came back, and two, just the season that he had. And he's going to be a first team All NBA player this year. I mean, he finished 5th in MVP voting from NBA media members. Obviously, we know Shea won it, but, you know, he got 5th place. So I think a lot of people around the league understand how dynamic of a player Cade Cunningham is on both ends of the court. But we're going to do one more question from the media members, and this was about Isaiah Stewart, and then we'll kind of just wrap this podcast up.
Was Isaiah Stewart hurt? And if not, is there any explanation of how he lost some of his defensive effectiveness? Does it look like he didn't have a lot of lift that he normally has, especially defensively?
Yeah, no, Stu was not hurt. Again, like I give Stu a ton of credit as well. Like I think he had, if I do the math right, he had the suspension going into All-Star. Didn't play for 7 or 8 games, came back, played for 4 or 5, and then he had the injury to his calf, which kind of set him out for a few weeks. And then again, only had, again, with the calf injury as well, you got to be very cautious with it. And so you almost have to shut him down as well. So I think there's some slight deconditioning at the wrong time of the year. And he only had 2-3 games to get back ready for the most intense basketball of the season. And so I don't think he was at the height of his conditioning, but he came in and gave us what he could at that time as well, but he was healthy.
So I know we kind of touched on just the overall impact with him defensively. I thought in the Magic series, like a lot of that lift and that bounce was there. I've probably mentioned that 8-block game so many times that you guys are probably sick of me hearing that. The second round series, it didn't really seem like he did have the same lift. So I understand the question that was asked. Uh, but the way Trajan kind of explained it, like he had the suspension, comes back 4 games, gets injured, then is out for a long period of time, and then comes back again right before the playoff starts. And maybe he wasn't in peak condition. Stu said he wasn't injured as well. I think people kind of speculated just given the minutes that he was playing because it was like anywhere from like 4 minutes to 10 minutes. And he was routinely a 20-minute per game guy off the bench for JB Bickerstaff this year. But it's good to hear that Stu wasn't injured. It was just kind of confusing with the rotations in the playoffs. Obviously, Paul Reed was just playing out of his mind in the second round series for also, I would say 6 games. I feel like game 7, he just wasn't really the same Paul Reed that was like getting the Pistons back in the games and impacting it. But you got to credit Cleveland for their defense in game 7. But the other 2 players he did touch on were Danis Jenkins and Ron Holland. He kind of talked about how Danis, if he comes back and has the type of summer that he did last and keeps developing, he does really like what Danis can bring because he said last year Danis wasn't even on their radar really of making the team. He was a 2-way guy, and he's really excited to see what Danis can do and develop and get better. And he also talked about Ron Holland being a top 5 pick and how it's not easy for a top 5 pick to kind of just play within a role and kind of stay into that box. And he thought that Ron Holland actually carved out a role that JB Bickerstaff outlined for him, has gotten better at it. I think a lot of people were very frustrated with Ron Holland's, I guess, lack of minutes in the postseason. I understand it. I was really surprised that he didn't get more clock in the second round series, given that you have two high potent players in the backcourt and Donovan Mitchell and James Harden. But, overall, like this season, I'm not going to say it was a failure. I've seen so many talking heads say it was a failure because the Pistons were a number one seed. And if you didn't make the finals, it was a bust. Like, I still think this season did check off a lot of boxes for me. My expectations were low, though. I wanted to see them win a home playoff game. They did that. I wanted to see them win a first round series. They did that. Now, my expectations going into next season, they'll be a little bit higher because, you got the monkey off your back of winning a home playoff game. You got the monkey off your back of winning a first round series. Like before that, you didn't do it since 2008, and it's 2026 now. You've done that now. So I think expectations are going to be a little bit more higher, and fans are going to expect more out of the Detroit Pistons after winning 44 games and 60 games. So it'll be interesting to see how the Eastern Conference does shake out. But overall, I think Trajan Langdon's message was they're going to explore options to get better if it does make sense for them. They're really going to lean on development again with the young core that they do have. They like Jalen Duren. They just aren't really in love with the max contract talks. Now, Trajan didn't say that specifically, but I think we can all agree $200 million for Jalen Duren. That's more my opinion. That's not Trajan Langdon's opinion. $200 million for Duren, I think, is just a little bit too much, and it would be an overpay in my personal opinion. Understand he's 22, but $40 million, I think, is a little bit too high. Maybe they can kind of meet in the middle and both sides are happy where they feel like they got a good deal. But overall, I think this offseason is going to be very important for the Detroit Pistons. And again, if you guys watch the press conference, it's a very boring press conference. You'll see Hamill said JP. You'll see Trajan basically deflect about 20 different variations of, are you going to make a big move? But kudos to him for staying level-headed and poised with these Detroit Pistons reporters, because I know they can be very clever with the way that they do ask questions. But I do want to wrap up this podcast. We're going to be doing another podcast this week. We're going to be having Zarek on. I'm sure a lot of you guys remember him. He's a credentialed NBA photographer and a reporter. So we'll be kind of talking to him about this offseason and kind of what to expect this season as a whole and some other things that we'll be talking about as well. But hope you guys are having a great Tuesday, and we'll see you very soon. And as always, go Pistons. Peace.